what do you think that are some examples of simple things that anyone can do to contribute to this kind of climate adaptation?
Well, I think the key thing is, I mean, it's different wherever people are in the world. Their adaptation needs are going to be different, So in terms of on a practical level, it's this is not the same sort of conversation as make sure you do your recycling or turn the taps off when you clean your teeth. It's there's not the kind of 5 things you can do to save the planet sort of thing here. I think with adaptation, it's first of all sort of to be mindful of it, to be mindful that that's what you're maybe doing. When you are changing your shopping list to include more sun cream because there's more heat, there's hotter days. That's an adaptation. And if I need to buy more sun cream, what packaging am I going to buy it in? What's the most sort of ethical packaging or ethical company I can buy it from? So it's kind of be aware that you are adapting, I think, is the first thing, to reflect on what's happening in the world around you and what adaptations you're making, but maybe your employer's making, maybe your town is making, and kind of understand them. I think adaptation has can be quite empowering as well, because there's a lot of places around the world who have declared a climate emergency, which is great, off the back of kind of the pressure that Extinction Rebellion created. But when they talk about their plans for it, it tends to be, what are we going to do to reduce our carbon emissions? That is mostly the conversation, which obviously has to be central to the conversation. But the interesting thing about that is that if a town or city reduces all of its carbon emissions and gets to kind of net zero, it doesn't mean that every other city is going to do the same thing. And so they are kind of they're kind of at the mercy of greater forces, but they do have control over the way that their town or city or village or street might adapt to climate change. So they could be talking about, say, in Copenhagen, where they've experiencing sort of more intense rainfall. So they have more, that instead of the rain being spread out over a whole day or over a whole sort of month, it kind of comes in one big deluge. So you get these kind of deluges and droughts, which means there's lots of water kind of flooding out onto the road. And so they've seen that, and they've adapted to that by putting in a drainage system to be able to cope with this extra water. And so that is a way in which a country or a city can sort of adapt, and it's something they can do and to create a positive impact. So I think for politicians, it's especially local politicians, who can say, right, we can see climate change coming. Here's our adaptation strategy. Come and join us and help create it. So I think talk to politicians, local politicians, about what's happening in our town or city to adapt to the changes we're seeing because of climate change. That's another thing that people can do. But then, yeah, more broadly, I think it's, the key thing I guess a third thing would be for people to have conversations about adaptation, really, to just get it up the agenda, get people talking about it, because we know that there's the promises that have been made for funding from central governments and international bodies for how much funding there's going to be for adaptation. Those commitments aren't being reached. There's still an adaptation gap. There's not as much finance available for adaptation as has been promised, or as is, more importantly, as is needed. And so we need to get it on the agenda so that people who are most affected by climate change are normally the ones who have the least voice, and they aren't able to lobby as easily for it. And so there's a real need to get it up the agenda to make sure that people who are most impacted by climate change are enabled to adapt to it while they're also trying to mitigate it. So that would be the kind of third one. I can't think of any more really sort of tangible ones at this point, but I think it's just to be aware, that just to kind of have a bit of reflection on the adaptations that are happening is really the key thing to think about.